Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm Scott Wurtzbacher, and I couldn't be more excited. I have been anticipating today's show for probably more than 10 years. A few short weeks ago, three friends and I completed a huge bucket list adventure by traveling to Africa and climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. Today, we're going to recap that journey. Mount Kilimanjaro, located in Tanzania, is also known as the Roof of Africa. It's the highest point on the continent and the highest freestanding mountain above sea level in the world. Its summit at Uhuru Peak reaches 19,341 feet into the atmosphere. And today I have my climbing partners with me. We've got Sydney Ropp, a pastor from Pennsylvania, Kendal Hostetler, a builder from Virginia, and Karl Miller, who you might remember from episode 3 of this podcast about his family's RV trip across the United States. Our guide on our Kilimanjaro climb called this group the Simba Group, and I loved that. Simba in Swahili means lion. Now, as a participant in this epic climb, I'd rather not be the one asking the questions. So today, I am honored to have my very good friend, Katie Oakley, joining us from across the pond in London to help us facilitate the conversation. Katie's recently transitioned from a very successful career in international brand marketing, and she's one of the most thoughtful and inquisitive people I know. She's been a friend and encourager to me throughout my preparations to get ready for this climb, and she's the perfect person to help the Simba Group recall our experience. Simba Group, Katie, welcome to the campfire.
Thank you, Scott. I'm just delighted to be here. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be able to facilitate this conversation. And I'm going to jump right in because I don't know anything really about Kilimanjaro. I know it's not Everest. I know it's not the Alps. So it would be really great to know a little bit more about what climbing Kilimanjaro is like. So how would you describe it to people who know nothing about what a climb at Kilimanjaro could look like? And maybe who'd like to kick off?
Sydney, I'm going to throw it to you because you're the first face that I see here on my screen.
You have to do it. That's how I would describe it. It was great, amazing. I would highly recommend it, especially if you've got a good group of people to do it with.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people that do it alone, but I would definitely recommend to do it with friends.
How would you describe it?
You know, I would say that it's doable. You know, it was definitely, it's going to take effort and planning and training, but it's doable. I mean, one of our guys in the group, climbed without any training because of the circumstances that he was in. So anything is possible on this mountain, and it's not out of reach. I mean, we met a 75-year-old man up at the peak. And so while it's difficult, it's certainly a reachable goal.
So it's difficult, it's reachable, it's doable.
Yes.
Yeah. And Carl, what was it? Was it difficult, reachable, doable? How was it for you?
Yeah, so Kilimanjaro is the world's tallest freestanding mountain. It's a volcano. And what's neat about it, I enjoyed, was we took our time climbing. You can do treks as little as 4 or 5 days, or you can stretch out different routes and go 9 days. And what we were advised was to take at least 6 or 7 days, because the success rate of getting to the summit is much greater if you take a 7-day trek as opposed to trying to, do this in 4 days. And the reason that is because this we're in the U.S., so everything is measured in feet. It's 19,341 feet. It's very thin air at the top of that mountain. So your body needs time to acclimate, especially for us flatlanders who are living at about 800 feet of elevation above sea level. So for me, it was fun to go through the different ecosystems. We started out at 5,000 feet. We're in a rainforest. we're climbing. It ends up raining just a little bit on their first day getting out of the forest. And then, you're at a camp. And then eventually, as you gain altitude, you get above tree level and you get into a different ecosystem called the moorlands. And then from there, you get into alpine desert as you continue to make your way up. So it was really neat to see the different ecosystems and the different trees and just the way the landscape changed so drastically. And yeah, I agree with Sydney that it is doable. And I was impressed with our guides who the very first thing they talked to us about on the very first day was mindset. And they just really encouraged us to have a positive mindset. And the minute you start to doubt or think you can't do it, you've lost. And so the trek is a mental game as well as a physical game. And I would argue probably even more of a mental game than a physical game.
Yeah. Scott, you're nodding. The positive mindset. It was all about mindset, was it?
Well, these guys know for sure. There's no question about it. This is a mental climb. And, I've told this story a bunch of times since we've gotten back, but the whole trip is kind of this build up to the summit, the night where you summit. And on summit night, we've spent, 5 days kind of preparing our bodies, acclimating. And on that last night, you hope that you've eaten enough, you've got enough fuel, you've rested enough. And we start to climb at midnight. And we climbed for about 6.5 hours in the dark with our headlamps on, up a very, very steep incline at high altitude with thin air, trying to reach the summit around the time that the sun rises in the morning. And as Karl said, as soon as those negative thoughts start coming in, you're done. And I've said to people before, I'm a mildly neurotic person, and so those worry thoughts, they definitely affect me. And so for me, like, it was a huge mental game. And Karl and I laughed because after we got to the top, we realized we were both kind of employing the same tactic. So I was actually counting my breaths from 1 to 10 for the entire 6.5 hours of the summit night, because that was the only way I could get consistent oxygen to my body and also sort of keep those worry thoughts from getting in my head. And talking to Karl a little bit afterwards, like, turns out he was doing the same thing. Although Karl's more ambitious, he was able to count to 250. I could only get to 10.
And Kendal, how was it for you?
The thing I love about going last is I can just say I agree with Karl and Sydney. But no, for me, I loved it as well as all the different, instead of ecosystems, I was referring to it maybe as climates. Like Mount Kilimanjaro has so many different climates, which we were very fortunate and maybe didn't experience quite the different types of weather that you can face on Mount Kilimanjaro. We had relatively beautiful weather all the way up. We were very fortunate, but we got to experience a little bit of the rainforest and rain, and then up in the alpine deserts and the lava rock. And it was just a great experience to see how the mountain changed as we gained elevation.
And while you're picking on Kendal, Katie, I do have to throw out there that he was the team climber that was probably the most impressive, considering that he started the climb with not one, but multiple different physical sort of impairments that should have prevented him from making that climb. But Kendal had the mental stamina to push through a whole lot of things, and he was definitely our trooper.
And because of that, I feel like I'm healed now, Scott. Training tactics on stretches and getting, so I had a herniated disc, which I was fighting with prior to the trip, and through hiking and doing some of Scott's stretches and so forth, I feel like, by the time I summited that mountain, I literally felt 100% better. And even today, fast forward 2 weeks, I feel great.
And tell me, if we just go back a little bit, why did you want to do it in the first place?
I think the dream kind of started for me. Scott and I are in a network. We're both in the real estate space, and we both have the same coaching company connection there. That's how we met years ago. And I'm involved in a couple of other smaller groups within that organization. And there was just a group of guys. We were sitting around I think we were probably just sitting around a campfire one evening at an event. And kind of threw out we should do an adventure together. And anyway, long story short, of that group of guys that was there, one of them was immediately said, "Oh yeah, I'd love to do that." And then you should talk to Scott Wurtzbacher. And so that's kind of, I think it was just kind of started from a dream for me to let's go do something hard. Let's do something that's an adventure. Let's just do something together so we can deepen our relationship. That was sort of the intent. And I'm kind of a little bit of an adventure junkie anyway, and I like to do hard things. I've run some ultra marathons and just different things like that to kind of push the limits of what I know my body has done in the past and what it can do. And I think that's kind of where it started. And so when I called Scott, we had a conversation, and I was like, I just kind of threw it out there. I was like, hey, you know, I'm thinking about getting a group of guys together to go climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And Scott immediately was like, I'm in. I'm looking at a picture right now of Kilimanjaro on my vision board. I said, I'm going to climb that mountain someday. And I love Scott's comment that he said to me is, you know, later he said, you know, if not now, when, you know, so let's do it. And just he was in. He was committed immediately. And then out of that, you know, the group dynamics changed, COVID, and we postponed the trip a year. And ended up there was 4 of us that ended up climbing. There was 5 going to go. My brother in Wisconsin was scheduled to go, and unfortunately he couldn't get a negative COVID test passed, and even though he felt fine health wise. So the 5 got trimmed to 4 even in the last 24 hours. But so that's where it started. I think just to be able to push the limits of what you've done in the past, and it opens up new arenas in your mind and your body when you break through when you break through the ceiling of something that you've accomplished in your life. And I think it's just a good mental game to do as a person, is to get out of your comfort zone and do something that's hard.
And Sydney, what was the pull for you? Why did you say yes?
Well, I said yes because I was invited along by my cousin Kendal, and it really wasn't something that I had unlike Scott, I didn't have it on my vision board. I wasn't dreaming of climbing this mountain someday. Interestingly, I did find a 100 list bucket list after I said yes, I would go climb it. And on that list was climb a significant mountain someday. So it was one of the things, that I had thought of back in the early 2000s and written on a list. But my cousin Kendal called and wanted to know if I wanted to go along. And I didn't think it was going to work out, but God made it possible. And so I was able to join them, and really glad I did.
Yeah. And so Kendal, why was it a big yes from you?
I'm along the same lines as Sydney, as far as it was not even on my bucket list. We were spending an afternoon mountain biking with Karl. Me and one of my friends, we were mountain biking, and Karl mentioned it, that, hey, a group of us are going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And I literally right there on the trail pretty much committed and said, well, I'm in. For me, I like experiencing new cultures, meeting new people, trying new foods, and just, really experiencing different culture than where I would have grown up. So, and I love adventure. So I was all in pretty much from the start, but there again, it was not on my bucket list as such either, but I am always up for a new trip or a new adventure.
And Scott, same, you were all in straight away. Why?
I mean, Karl pretty much nailed it. It's interesting because I'm sitting in the same place where I was sitting when Karl made that phone call to me, and my vision board is sitting right across from me. And I do. I mean, it was probably 10, maybe even 15 years ago that I just printed a whole bunch of pictures of places that I wanted to go, and I put them on this board. And there's a whole bunch of things on this board I'm looking across at right now, and Kilimanjaro is just one of them. And, I'm getting up there, I'm not a spring chicken anymore. And I got a whole bunch of pictures of things that I haven't done in my life. And when Karl called and said, hey, I'm thinking about putting this group of guys together, I mean, I'm literally looking at the picture, and I'm looking at this big list, and I'm thinking, like, I got to start checking things off the list. If, like Karl said, if not now, then when? And so I'm like, let's do it. I'm in. It's time. So yeah, I think for me, it was just, this sort of feeling of seize the day. I've made this list. This is something that I've been thinking about for a very, very long time as a dream. And when Karl brought it to me, it just felt like it was time for the dream to become a reality.
So if we think about it becoming a reality, and let's say there are sort of 3 stages, I guess. So a planning stage, a sort of doing it stage, and then kind of coming home. Well, what was the planning stage like for you?
I would say for me, the planning stage was a lot of fun.
Hmm.
The anticipation, and as soon as I committed to going, because I'm kind of a planner anyway, I went on and start finding all these lists and start checking things off the list, ordering things, and when we got maybe a month away from going, it was quite a bit closer. I had already got pretty much everything on my list checked off. There was a few items I hadn't yet. We did this Zoom call, and the other guys were talking about, okay, we need to find this list, and we need to find lists, and we need to begin to, put everything together. And I'm laughing to myself because I'm thinking, guys, I did that like 3 months ago. I'm so ready, man. I was like a little kid in a candy store. I could not wait, and so my anticipation level was through the roof for sure.
So did you share your list and everything you'd done with them on the call?
Well, actually, they had put together or emailed out a list that was some of the same ones that I had, so it was all good. And then Scott, he put together this like Excel spreadsheet, and he was all techie with it.
Yeah, for me, I just read a lot of books. I mean, the good news is in today's age, there's a lot of Kindle books and ebooks and even free books, and so I probably read about 8 to 10 journals of people who've climbed, and so you pick up a lot of information just reading books of other people who've experienced the same thing. But again, you can read all the books in the world, but as Cindy said in the opening statement, is nothing like actually being there and seeing it and feeling it, and experiencing that thin air and experiencing the joy of the guides and the porters and joking around and the camaraderie and the relationships that deepen and form when you're, again, with your friends on the mountain. I mean, there's nothing that you can read all the books you want to, but until you experience it, there's nothing like going there. So for me, I just kind of read books and then gathered lists and took tips, and, we just learned from other people as much as I could.
I think, Karl, that's such a great point, because you really can't, like, the direct experience is the only way to really get there. And, I think I did the same. I did a lot of reading, and we probably had a Zoom call at least once a month leading up. And then as we got closer, we started doing them, like, I don't know, once a week or so. But, even on this podcast, I've had conversations with people like Lauren Donahue was on the podcast, and she's climbed Kilimanjaro, and Derek Wood he was on the podcast, but he was also kind enough to jump on a Zoom call with us and talk to us about the trip. And that was super helpful. Katie, our friend Cindy Lou, has been to Kilimanjaro, and she talked with me a little bit. And so, all of these conversations, they're really, really, really helpful. And I can tell you that, from the books and the lists and the conversations, like, I don't feel like I could have been any more prepared, but yet you get there and there's still a high degree of uncertainty. Because nobody knows how the altitude is going to affect their individual body. And there's that aspect of it that you just don't know. There's just a certain element of this thing that you can't plan for.
And Kendal, was that the same for you? That sense of there's so much you can't plan for?
It was, and the levels of anticipation for me were off the charts, and I was excited. But the planning stages for me, since I'm a little bit of a seat of my pants type of guy, I probably did less planning and was a little less prepared as far as gear and stuff than the rest of the crew to some degree. But I just, went into it like, I'll take it as it comes and be ready regardless.
And this is the guy that was scheduled to have surgery. He was just going to show up on the mountain like a few days later, but that got postponed, and he was in a lot of pain in the airport line. He could walk, but standing still hurt him. And man, I mean, again, like Scott alluded to already, Kendal was definitely a trooper when it came to the physical pain and physical aspect of just pushing through. But we had a saying up there on the mountain that, and this came from Scott's trainer, motion is the lotion. So as long as you were moving and as long as you were stretching properly and you were in motion, you could push through. But anyway, I just want to shout out to Kendal. I mean, definitely from a mental attitude and a physical overcoming, he definitely was the hero of our group.
Well, I will definitely say motion is the lotion. Amen to that.
Yeah. So you're at the airport, you're on your way. Tell us what the trip itself was actually like. How did it feel to realize the trip, to be doing the trip?
I'll jump in. I mean, again, I think for me, there were like, there was so much uncertainty about this whole trip. I mean, traveling to Africa was a very new experience for me. I didn't know what that was going to be like. And then you build in the element of COVID and what traveling with COVID was like. And then the new experience of being in Tanzania and what that was going to be like. And then of course, you know, what's the climb going to be like? What's the altitude? So for me, there would definitely was a whole lot of anticipation. And I mean, I think that for me, that anticipation, like managing that anticipation was a huge piece for me throughout the entire climb. And it almost felt like one hurdle after the other. Like we had from a travel standpoint, we had to take COVID tests before we could even get on the plane in the United States. We had to take COVID tests when we got to the airport in Tanzania before we could leave the airport. And we had to take a COVID test again before we got on the plane to come back to the United States. So like even just that alone was created a lot of sort of uncertainty. The other guys on the trip, we've got some international travelers here that have a lot more experience than I did in terms of traveling internationally. But like for me, I think it was just, you know, every step of the way was like absorbing new experience kind of into my own sort of being. And then, you know, once I've kind of passed those hurdles, it became more and more comfortable. I mean, for me, there's no question. Like if I were to go back, it would be a completely different experience now that I've actually gotten past all the uncertainty.
How was the trip for the rest of you? Karl, how did you feel about doing it actually when you were on the trip?
Yeah, so it was funny. Even on the way over there, we got on the plane, and Scott and I were sitting on the same row. You know, he's giving me the eye and a fist bump, like we're doing this, like we're actually doing this. And so, you know, getting there was great. You stepped off the airplane, and it was just, you know, probably 70 degrees and just a beautiful morning at 7:30 in the morning when we landed in Kilimanjaro. I think, you know, for me, I just tried to enjoy the day we were in. Like, you know, don't stress about the next day. We landed in Moshi, got through all the customs, took a few hours, got to the hotel. We were just going to relax, have a 0 day, forced ourselves to stay awake to catch up with the 8-hour time difference, and then went to bed early and slept really well that night. So for me, it was just one day at a time. And I didn't really go in with a big expectation. I went in with the mindset I'm going to trust our guides. And by the way, I can't speak enough about our guides. God Listen was our guide's name, Gotti, a.k.a. Gotti with Zara Tours. Shout out to Zara Tours and the owners there and the guides. And Gotti had been up that mountain 500 times. So when I knew that, Gotti was actually referred to me by a couple of other people, and I specifically requested him as a guide. And so I just went in with the idea that I'm going to trust him. He knows what he's doing. And I think that was probably the biggest life lesson, because I'm in a industry where I help guide people with making big decisions financially with home buying and home selling. And I think for me, one of the life lessons that I've just learned is just to trust the guides, like do what they say and follow their advice and listen and be okay when things aren't going wrong, because they're telling you that this is normal and this is okay. And I think that that was for me just one of the big life lessons I came away with. So I think just back to your question, I just try to take it one day at a time and just enjoy the day, enjoy the hour. I mean, enjoy the mile you're in as you're climbing. You know, that's a runner's mantra as well. When you're running and you feel terrible, you know, try to enjoy, just run the mile you're in. Don't stress about the next, don't stress about the finish line. Don't stress about the next, you know, when you're doing ultra running and trails, there's a big mountain ahead. There's always a mountain ahead. Don't stress that mountain. Just run the mile you're in. And that was sort of the philosophy I took into this trip is, you know, enjoy the day you're in, enjoy the hour that you're in. And that was sort of my mindset.
And Sydney, what were you saying to yourself as you were going through the trip?
You know, I'm the kind of person that even though I really enjoyed the anticipation of it, I'd much rather do it. Right. And so, as Scott already alluded to, all the unknowns, you know, is my body going to cooperate with the high altitude, you know, all these questions. And so when you actually give yourself something to do and you can put one foot in front of the other and focus in the moment, there's a lot of enjoyment or peace in that, right? Of being able to just say, okay, now we're finally here. We're finally going up this mountain. We are, you know, you come to our very first night, we come to camp, and, you know, there's all these question marks about, well, what's camp going to be like? What's the sleeping arrangement? How's that going to work? How's the food going to work? How's our portable toilet going to work, right? And so being able to come to that first night, come to the camp and see how the things are working together, functioning, was great because it brought a level of how would I say, just relaxing about, okay, so this is how this is going to work for the next 6 days. And so it was really good.
I need to give Sydney a quick shout out because I feel like he was sort of our group motivator especially when the climb got the hardest. Like Sydney definitely maintained the sort of the most consistent energy and enthusiasm as we were on the climb. I mean, as I'm, whether behind him or in front of him, like slowly taking my breaths and counting, like he's singing with the guides and, singing the Hakuna Matata song. And he was just full of energy. And I was just so impressed with his ability to sort of keep us inspired and just keep the positive energy going. So Sydney, huge thanks to you for that. It was definitely a big help on that mountain.
Sounds wonderful. Sounds wonderful. And Kendal, what did you use, if you like, to keep yourself going, given that obviously you'd started with a reasonable amount of pain, as I understand it?
Because of that, looking back, I did try to enjoy those small moments, like Karl said, and enjoy the mile you're in. But I probably had I wish I would have enjoyed the small things more. And I tried to, even mention it out loud to the group a time or two. Hey, look at that view. Let's take a minute to look at this. But it was I had a little bit of, maybe a lot of anticipation about that summit night and how it was going to work and how my body was going to react to the altitude, and would my body be able to hold up to summit that night. And I was determined that I was going to summit. So looking back, I probably didn't enjoy the moments as much as I should have or would have liked to.
And when you got to the summit, how did that feel?
For me, it was actually a little emotional. I don't know why. I'm not an emotional guy at all. Like, I don't even cry at funerals, but it was I don't know. It's hard to even put it in words, but it was just, a deep emotional feeling for me.
It was euphoric. I would say that. I would say, there's a couple of things that happen. Like you're coming up this really steep incline and it's dark. And at one point when the sun started to come up over the horizon, like we didn't actually see the sun, but the whole horizon looked like it was on fire. And you had to turn around to see that. It wasn't in front of you. You had to turn around and see that. And I did, as much as it was painful to me, because when I lose my breathing rhythm, it kind of messed with my whole movement pattern. But I did turn around and I saw that horizon. It just looked like it was on fire. And as the sun started to come up, it starts to get light. That's right around the time that you sort of come around this bend and the really steep slope, all of a sudden it levels off. And lo and behold, right there before us is a sign that says Stella Point. And it's the first part of, it's not the summit, but it's just shy of the summit. And, essentially when you get to Stella Point, you kind of know, like, we're all but there. We just have a little bit further to go. It's a gentle slope from there. And by that point, the sun is up. So now it's like, I've got daylight. I've made it through the hardest part. Like, oh my gosh, we did it. We're here. And it really was this sort of euphoria. Cause I can tell you, for me, I legitimately didn't know if I was going to make it to the top until I was actually at the top. And so when I came around that corner and saw Stella Point, like I just felt like a crazy rush of overwhelm. And then once that overwhelm sort of dissolved, like huge emotion, just like Kendal said.
And Karl, was it similar or different for you getting to the summit?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I kind of had my emotional moment maybe about 4:00 in the morning. I don't know. You lose track of time. But we started up, at midnight. We're hiking. It's dark and it was windy. It was cold. And physically, I wasn't feeling 100%. I had a little bit of a stomach issue. And so I'm climbing. But long story short, after about 4 hours of that, you're just, like Scott said, you're focused. I was focused. Let me speak for myself. I was focused on just deep breaths. And I was counting to 250 in my mind. That's just sort of what I do when I run. And I knew that when I got to 250, either A, we're going to take a break, or B, I'm going to start over and get to 250 again. It was just sort of putting all my mental energy into breaths and just one step. And just sort of, again, when you have a guide, all you have to do is just basically follow the footsteps of the person in front of you. So whether it was one of our teammates or the guide, just kind of doing that. And we stopped for a break. It was before the sun came up, before that beautiful red band hit the horizon that Scott mentioned, which is, again, just stunning. It's so beautiful. But we stopped at a rock, and I'm sitting down, and I just wanted to get some water to drink. And all of a sudden, next thing I know, my shoulders just start shaking, and I'm gathering breath, and I'm just kind of breaking down crying almost because I was kind of overwhelmed with emotion. And it wasn't emotion that it was kind of hard to describe. But I think, okay, this is hard, but we're going to make it. And I think just this kind of big thing of, wow, I worked so hard for this, and I'm going to keep pushing through. And but it was kind of fun. I mean, like I said, like Scott said, Cindy was just full of energy. Next thing I know, Cindy's right there giving me a word of encouragement, praying for me, and the guides are right there, and they're just checking my headlamp to make sure it's not too tight. I had a little bit of a headache coming on, and it was everything was good. Next thing I know, we're up to go, and I grab my trekking poles, and my pack's not there. And one of our assistant guides had thrown the pack on his shoulders. Okay, well, I'm carrying this the rest of the way just to take the burden off. And again, we're carrying a light pack with layers and water and snacks and that at that point I was like, okay, I'm going to make this. It's going to be hard, but I'm going to make it. And I think that was, to me, kind of my biggest emotional moment of the trip. And it's kind of hard to describe what was in those emotions, but it was full of gratitude. First of all, that I was on this mountain. I think the physical aspect, acknowledging that this is hard. And this kind of sucks in the moment right now, and it's hard, but also just a deep sense of gratitude for the guys I was with and for our guides, and just knowing that that accomplishment was going to happen. So by the time I got to the summit, it felt awesome. It was very, I think Scott said a good word for it, euphoric. It was great, and we took a lot of great pictures. We're all smiling and just having a high energy. But that was great. But then we had the descent, and it's hard. Sometimes you forget that, okay, we're still at 19,000 feet. Now we got to drop down to 15,000 feet, and the air is thin. So we were all in a hurry to get down, but going down is hard too. I got pretty gassed, and the body was very tired at that point. But that was probably my biggest emotional moment. Was about 4:00 in the morning on the way up the mountain.
And Sydney, what was your biggest emotional moment? Was it the summit or something else?
Yeah, I would say that it was definitely euphoric, as Scott said, at the summit. And I just had so much gratitude of here we are finally, all of us are together up here at the top. And the views were just stunning. And there was these amazing glaciers sitting up there, and the sunrise, and we were really blessed with just beautiful weather. And so it was clear. We were able to see. We could have been boxed in with clouds and not been able to see anything. Could have been snowing. It wasn't. It was as warm and as wind still and as clear as we could have hoped for it to possibly be. And what was amazing is starting out the night before. So our final camp before summit, or our summit night camp, was at 15,000 feet. And so at that point, I was no longer concerned about the altitude because of how my body had behaved so far with it. It was no longer a question to me is am I going to be able to summit or not? And so kind of that concern of mine had gone away. And when we started out, like these guys mentioned already, it's midnight, middle of the night, but it's a full moon night. And so we don't even need our headlamps to be able to climb. You can just see it. It was really, really amazing, the lighting of the night. And as we got up to the top, you ask about emotional moments. I mean, I think every day I had some moments that, behind my sunglasses, the guys didn't realize I had some tears. And just the gratitude of it. And so much of this climb for me was a spiritual thing, because I knew I was anticipating before the climb that I was going to have some real God moments on this mountain. And so he didn't disappoint at all. He really, really, we had some moments together and conversations together, I would say. And as I prayed, and he just downloaded some things to me. And so it was beyond how that would be a good way to put it. It was beyond what I would have hoped for.
So was it a spiritual quest, I guess I'd say, for you, Scott, too?
Oh, no question about it. I mean,
Mm,
the whole thing. And I would echo what Sydney said. I mean, just about just being filled with gratitude. And, the other thing too is like, part of a spiritual experience to me is connection to other people.
mm,
And, I didn't know, I knew Carl before this trip. I didn't know Kendall or Sydney, other than a couple of Zoom calls, but, we got really tight. And then and guys, we had some pretty deep conversations up there too, whether during the climb, whether we were in our dining tent, like, there was just a lot of things that happened, and discussions that we had. But also the porters and the guides. I mean, the
mm,
connection with those guys. I mean, you don't climb this mountain. This is not an individual accomplishment. It is just not. Like, the porters and the guides, they do just about everything but pick you up and carry you up the mountain. And as Carl said, the best advice that I would have is the same thing as Carl, is just trust the guides. But I tell you, our group, they had such big hearts, and getting to know those men was so much fun. We learned a lot of Swahili. We exchanged a lot of stories, and part of the euphoria of getting up to the summit was giving those guys big giant hugs, and just
mm,
feeling like brothers. I mean, that to me, like, there was a spiritual experience in that. For me, was just that connection. And, like, to me, I think it's so cool that I'm now back here in the United States, and I honestly feel like I've got brothers in Tanzania. And that's a really cool experience. And just knowing that, it just feels really good.
And so, how does it feel to actually do the descent? Carl, you said, I think that the descent was also hard. Kendall, how was the descent for you? How was it to come down the mountain?
It was great to get in lower elevation and be able to breathe easier. But we hiked, I think we left summit just before 8 o'clock, and we didn't get to camp that night until maybe 4:30 ish.
Mhm.
So it was, and remember, we had left at midnight to go up to the summit. So it was a hard day. It was a
Yeah.
really hard day. I was a little worried about the descent bothering my knees with hiking poles. I was pleasantly surprised that they held up quite well. But it was definitely a long day. And I would say, just because you make it to the summit, don't think that the hike is over. It
Mm,
is hard work going down as well.
One thing I would say about the descent was, like, for me, coming down is where that climb transitioned from being a mental experience to a physical experience. Because when I was, getting to the top, was just, there's so much anticipation. And, like, I mean, for me, I knew I needed to, like, stay focused, because I know, like, people get hurt coming down because they, kind of
mm,
lose their concentration, and they think like, oh, the climb is over. And it's really hard. It's steep. You're on loose rock, you're on scree. And so you have to be very, very careful. But, like, for me, all of the sort of anticipation and all the sort of, like, worry thoughts, and how are things going to go. I mean, all of that sort of came to a climax at the top for me. And so for me, it was like just a straight up physical challenge coming back down.
mm.
I can't say that it was like a real mental struggle coming down at that point. Like, we summited, and now we're just on our way back down, and we just have to grind it out. I would also say that, and maybe it's because we just kept moving every single day, but I didn't experience personally any sort of muscular soreness or stiffness at any point in the climb
Mm.
until that last day when we came down. So going up, no problem. Coming back down that next morning, like, my calves were on fire that next day. So yeah, I don't know. I think that was my kind of experience with the descent.
And having done this wonderful adventure, this wonderful trip, what are the life lessons that you mentioned? A couple of them. What are the life lessons you take from this that you use in your everyday now?
Well, Carl's so good. The last when we after the climb was over, we went to dinner one night, and Carl pulled out his little notebook, and we came up with the top 10 lessons of Kilimanjaro. And I don't know that we're going to cover them here, but I think we should go to Carl and get some of those top tips.
Yeah, so I mean, we did, and I think I've emailed this out to the guy. We just kind of had a good, fun little dinner discussion, and I can share a few of them. I don't know if
Please
we
do.
have time for all 10, but I think kind of like the Swahili word we heard over and over is pole pole, which is slowly, slowly. And sometimes you just go slow to go fast, or go slow to hit the goal. And it's just one small step in front of the other, one breath at a time, one deep breath at a time. Conserving energy will get you to the top of the mountain. If you're going fast and you're exhausted, you're keeled over just trying to gasp for breath. But the guides are really good at pole pole. So slowly is the way to climb a mountain. I think that's one thing that was definitely immediate. And I've already mentioned trusting your guides. These guides have a lot of experience. They were very intuitive to our needs. They were very intuitive to anyone who wasn't feeling good. They would come around and ask questions, and they were watching, even though they weren't obvious about it, but they were very intuitive to the needs of our group. And so trusting the guides. I think we touched on the fact that the trek is more mental than physical, especially as Scott said, going up. It's a mental game, and the moment you doubt, it's over. So just keeping a positive mental attitude. There's a lot I can share. You guys might want to jump in with a few of them too, but for me, one more that nobody climbs a mountain alone. It takes a team to climb a mountain. And so not only do we have our guides and our amazing strong porters who made camp life very comfortable by carrying up the dining tent, the cook tent, all the gear, but the teammates, lean into your teammates. There was times when one of us felt great and the rest of us not, and that switched around a little bit. But just to be able to lean into the strength of your teammates and the relationships there was just another really good lesson for me. No one climbs a mountain alone. Lean into your team, and those are a few takeaways for myself.
Sydney, any life lessons for us?
I would say a practical lesson for climbing the mountain. I'll say two things. On a practical lesson is take poles. You'll want them. You'll use them. You'll be glad you did. Trekking poles, and mine broke like partway through the climb, but Karl had enough duct tape along that we were able to make them work, and so I was really happy about that. And then the other thing is breathe more than you think you need to. Up near the top, I did like a Facebook Live just as we were coming up to the peak, and different people asked me this, man, you sounded like you were out of breath. And I'm like, oh, no, I wasn't. I was just purposely breathing that way. Most of us had listened to Wim Hof's talking about, breathing and how to breathe and all these things. So we were very active at breathing more than what we needed to breathe. And I think that is a huge thing in that high altitude and being successful in it. More of a life lesson or lessons that I brought home with me is, rely on God. When I climbed the mountain, I felt like it was extremely easy. Okay. And it was so easy that honestly, I haven't been completely level with the other guys. So they're going to hear this for the first time right now. I felt like it was one of the easiest things I'd ever done. Like it was ridiculous easy to the point that I didn't want to admit how easy it was because I didn't want to come across like I'm bragging or something like that. And so once we turn and we're coming back down the mountain, and I felt like the Lord said to me that, okay, I gave you the grace and ability to climb the mountain. Now I'm going to lift it off of you and let you come down in your strength so you know how much I was helping you. And coming down was difficult, much more difficult than going up. And now my muscles for the first time were feeling fatigued, and I was feeling like I'm ready for this to be over and all of these things. And whereas going up was just so easy. And so I came home with the life lesson of a reminder for me to rely on God's strength, and that even though I prepare, even though I train, even though I do those things, that God makes all the difference for me in being successful. And I was just very grateful for his help.
Kendal, similarly, did you have any life lessons for us?
I would say just a reminder to myself, something I'm using even here today in my relationships at work and with family, is maybe the importance of relationships is a life lesson I took away from that trip. Just getting to know these brothers deeper and yeah, just relationships in general, that they are important in life and they get us to where we're going. That's probably my biggest takeaway.
And Scott too, obviously your life lessons.
Well, it's funny. We just talked about, Kendal said the relationship with brothers and the connection. And I will admit, and I think I shared this with Karl in the beginning, I read in a book that oftentimes when you climb a mountain like Kilimanjaro, it can make friendships and it can also break friendships. So there was some apprehension on my part that I was going to be done with this trip, wanting to wring everybody's neck, and I'm so happy to report that couldn't be further from the truth. I think I felt a deep connection to these guys, and there was no point. I was grateful to have them there because they were all encouraging of me and supportive of me. And I've got friends for life on this call right here, and I'm really happy to say that there was no point on that trip where I felt any of that negative feeling. And so maybe they're thinking something different about me, especially if I did any complaining while I was up there. But yeah, the bonding and the relationships, again, with these guys, with the guides, with the porters, this is not something that you go do by yourself.
Well, it's very clear to me that you went up as friends and you came down as even better friends.
For sure. And then last two practical tips: bring treats. You're going to want some sweets or snacks. So bring your favorite snack, or Snickers bars or cashews or pistachios, whatever the case may be. And then the last thing is bring some salt. Because the food was a little bit bland at times. So bring your own salt and hot sauce. And that's two last little practical tips to make the trip enjoyable and have little fun moments along the way.
Be kind to yourself. Bring some treats. Bring some salt. Spice it up.
For sure.
Stay fresh.
Yep.
Well, guys, it's been a real pleasure and privilege for me to hear about this trip. Scott has a question that he always asks at the end of his podcast. So I'm going to hand back the mic back to him. But really, genuinely, it was a true pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing this with me.
Thank you, Katie, for facilitating an awesome conversation. It's I feel like I'm back on the mountain right now. And yes, there is a couple of questions that I ask everybody that comes on this podcast. And Karl and I have already had the opportunity to answer. So the question is, when they make a movie about this epic climb up Kilimanjaro, who are going to be the Hollywood actors that play this cast of characters that goes up? So we've got Chris Evans playing Karl Miller. Chris Evans is Captain America. And so it's fitting because Karl was the group leader for this climb, and he was the organizer. And so Captain America is gonna take us up this mountain. And then my answer a couple of episodes ago was Ty Burrell, the dad from Modern Family. So kind of the goofy guy at the back. And so Kendal and Sydney, it's your turn. We got to figure out how we're going to round out this cast of characters. So Sydney, who's going to play you in the movie?
The first person that came to mind was Brad Pitt, so I'm going to go with that. But until the casting calls are done, I'm just going to say Brad Pitt.
I love it. That's awesome. All right. Okay, Kendal.
I'm going to go with Keanu Reeves, and not simply because my wife thinks my hair looks similar to him on the mountain.
Oh my gosh, that's perfect. I love that so much. Well, and I think we can't let this podcast go without sharing a little bit of some of the experience that you got to have there on the mountain, Kendal. You were a bit of a celebrity while we were out there. Do you want to tell us about that?
So about 4 months before we went on this hike, I just decided to let everything grow, including my beard, hair. I just wanted to look a little bit like a mountain man, I guess, climbing the mountain. And so it was like instead of a no-shave November, it was more like a no-shave 4 months prior to us flying over to Tanzania. And I didn't think much of it other than I hated how long my hair was. It would get in my eyes, and it was just this is my normal cut and what I'm used to. But anyway, I did feel like I did bring a lot of joy to people on the mountain, because it started out at the bottom. People started calling me Jesus because of my hair, not down to my shoulders, but longer with a nice full beard. And I guess there was some Swahili films with some Jesus characters that was going through Africa in the previous year or two. And so all the porters and all the local people thought I looked like Jesus character on the movies that were being played over there at the time. So a lot of them, would come to get their blessings or bow down in front of me and say, we're climbing the mountain with Jesus. So I was glad to bring joy and blessing to the porters and guides on the mountain.
It was epic, and Kendal, I think, maybe was a little uncomfortable with it at first, but he started to embrace his role, and he really did bring a lot of joy on there, and you pulled it off great, Kendal. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was great. The porters are stopping for selfies with Kendal, on the way up the mountain, just laughing. And our guide said that we had good weather because everybody said that Jesus was on the mountain with us. So.
That's exactly right. So we got a movie with Keanu Reeves, Brad Pitt, Chris Evans, and Ty Burrell. And I'm going to name the movie for us, guys. It's Pole Pole. Slowly up Kilimanjaro. Nice. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to come on here today and talk to us. Katie, thank you so much for the facilitation. You were amazing. And for those listening, I really hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope our story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or you need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thank you for listening. Guys, thanks for being here.